Samantha Graham, Craig Roy, and Wayne Mason. That's the 7 for 3 of you guys.
Hey Jen, how you doing?
Which one is which? Yeah. Can you see? A little bit? So Samantha, yeah, Samantha's on this one, the top left. And then we're in the top right in our screen here, and then Craig's on the bottom and Wayne's on the bottom as well. Okay.
Perfect. So we will popped in there, so I'll probably get started here. Are all of the candidates ready to go?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. So hello everybody, welcome to the St. Mary's University Student Association Municipal Candidates Debate. My name is Samantha Graham and I'm a 4th year student in the Economics Department here at St. Mary's. I'm also the Vice President External with the Student Association. Firstly, we'd like to thank all of the candidates for taking part in today's discussion, as well as a huge thank you to all of those attending. Tonight's debate will focus on issues of importance to students, such as affordable housing, transportation, and policing, and there will also be a period at the end where you can ask your own questions. Existing in this primarily virtual environment, as many of us are, has meant that like many community members, students are more unaware of the election than ever, which is why tonight's debate is so important, so that students can be educated and confident before heading to the polls in whatever form that may be. So October 17th is the actual election date for the HRM. However, due to COVID-19, there are several ways to vote this year. So from October 6th to the 14th, there is telephone and online voting, and the advanced polling days are the 10th and the 13th. Elections Halifax is asking that voters prioritize the e-voting options and only vote in person if it is necessary in order to limit physical interactions. Before we begin, I'm going to outline the format of tonight's debate. So each candidate will be given 3 minutes for a short introduction and for closing remarks. These remarks will be given in a predetermined order per the candidates. Each candidate will have up to 10 minutes to respond to each question. However, that length of time is only given to ensure there's enough time for discussion. If a candidate would like to respond to another comment, they will ask permission from myself, the moderator. And after we've completed the predetermined questions, I will open the floor to questions from the audience, and feel free to pop those in there throughout the night, and I will look through them from the beginning. Please try to direct the questions to all candidates, but if you've directed it to one particular candidate, I'll try to rephrase that all candidates have a chance to answer the question. So with that, we'll begin, and I'll pass it over to Craig for his introduction.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Sorry, so my name is Craig Roy. I'm running to become Councillor in District 7 because as great as our community is, our community needs work. Halifax is evolving, but I believe our community has a long way to go, and I want to have a helping hand guiding the next generation and continuing to have a great and progressive Halifax. A little about me. I'm an activist and entrepreneur, and I have worked both in education, human resources, and the government sectors throughout my career. I have knowledge and experience needed to become your next District 7 councillor. I was raised with a strong and, oh my goodness. I was raised with a strong work and ethic background. Oh my goodness, I can't even speak. I apologize, tongue-tied. I was raised with a strong work in education ethics. After graduating high school, I moved to the beautiful city to attend university where I've obtained a bachelor's degree. And over the years, other certificates and certifications in business. In 2004, as a single individual, I adopted a 5-year-old and became a parent for the first time. So I understand the hardships that parents I understand the hardships that parents with children are facing, especially when it comes to affordable housing, transportation, and day-to-day living, amongst other things within our great city. I am trying to make our streets better, and in fact, if you are in my area, which is Brenton and Clyde Street, you would have noticed me and my dog out on a daily walk with bags in hand. Most recently, I've had garbage cans installed within several areas within District 7 with the hopes of eliminating the unnecessary amounts of garbage on our streets. In addition to my platform, which you can find at craigroy.ca, I want to meet the needs of our community with safer streets, parks, parking, designated bus lanes, attracting more diversity and inclusion with our community, promoting small businesses and industries, honoring our heritage while innovating for the future and supporting our art sector. Plus so much more as your councillor. So on October 17th, elect Craig Roy, District 7, Halifax South Councillor. I want to put your interests first.
Thank you, Craig, and I'll pass it over to Wei now.
Thanks, Samantha. So I want to start by acknowledging that Halifax Regional Municipality is in Mi'kmaq. The municipality and all the peoples here are beneficiaries of the peace and friendship treaties of the Mi'kmaq. I wish to extend to the Mi'kmaq people my respect and desire to build stronger relationships in the spirit and intent of those treaties. Yesterday was Treaty Day, and it reminded me that we should have a land acknowledgement. So if there's a lot of noise in the background, there's a lot of people in my house right now, just on the other side of the door. And if it sounds like a party, I don't think it is, but I haven't been out there. So forgive me for that. It's great to be here talking to St. Mary's students and residents of my alma mater, St. Mary's. And I want to thank SMUSA for their leadership in the university and the Halifax community for hosting. This is the second of the only 2 debates that we're going to have. So thank you for that. After 8 years, I hope residents of District 7 and Halifax know what to expect from me as your councillor. I work hard to communicate in an honest and unfiltered manner and be there when you need my support. Together, I think we share a positive vision of the future of Halifax and District 7, and it's one that builds on the work we've already done in these last 8 years and reflects your values and priorities. And for years, I've advocated for progressive ideas, and I've delivered proven results. And we can see that in the change in our parks, in transit and biking and walking and libraries, as well as our arts and culture investments. In these 8 years, I've learned that it can take a really long time to change the government. I could go on and on about that, but it is the old joke about changing the direction of a super tanker. But once you start to change the plans and you start to change direction and launch the city in a new direction, you start to see real results. And that's what we've been doing since 2012. In this next term, there are 3 areas of focus that I really want to see the city bear down on. The first is empowerment through economic security and affordable housing. Second is on building green and resilient communities. And the third is better connecting people and places in HRM. And I'll talk about those more when we get to the questions. In addition to meeting my promises, I work hard to represent my residents, fighting the province on the poorly conceived parking garage on the Common, providing leadership on the police and public safety review, working to protect Yonge Avenue not once but twice, and now going into a 3rd round on that, stopping the rezoning there for when it was proposed just last year, registering Schmidtville and Old South Suburb as heritage conservation districts, and many other enhancements to heritage protections in downtown. I convinced the council to ask the province to give us housing back. Housing's been a provincial responsibility since 1996. I think the municipality needs to get it back. Happy to talk about that in questions. And I've worked really hard to see renewal of our downtown, something that had been neglected for over 20 years. I'll just close by saying that we've made a lot of progress in the last 8 years, and I've enjoyed representing District 7, and I have enjoyed helping the municipality change and grow, and I'm asking for one more term to see these critical programs launched and completion in terms of getting the funding and getting them in the ground, and to continue to advocate for provincial and national levels for Halifax to receive the power and legislative authority that we need to make affordable housing and safe streets happen. So I look forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei, and over to Jen.
Okay, I just want to explain that we're using a text-to-speech software, so to read out Jen's responses. So that's the voice that you will be hearing.
Thank you. I should acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. My name is Jen Pally, and I'm running for councillor of District 7. I moved to Halifax 20 years ago to do a journalism degree at the University of King's College. I fell in love with the city and decided to stay. I couldn't get jobs in journalism because they all seemed to require that you take your own pictures. With my waning eyesight, I made questionable choices when it came to subject matter, so I got involved in disability advocacy. I thought I would be more reputable if I was arguing for accessible building design if I had a planning degree, so I got my master's in urban planning, then got a job on the transportation team at the Ecology Action Center. It was there that I became enamored with municipal politics, and initiated the RHRM Alliance, a collection of community groups fighting for a more livable and more sustainable HRM. I decided to run for council after I read Halifax 2050 and found it to be insufficient. I want an account of the carbon emissions in all proposed projects, both upfront emissions and those due to construction, to be identified in staff reports as a percentage of HRM's yearly carbon budget. I have an extensive platform that touches on housing, land use, taxes, social equity, arts and culture, community input, and transparency. I'm not anti-development, I'm pro-climate. If a developer can figure out how to build without concrete, glass, and steel, or figure out how to reuse a building, I'm all for it. I know we have a limited carbon budget, and we have to live within it for our children and our children's children. Our future won't look like our past.
That's all.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much to everyone for that introduction. So without further ado, I'll move into our predetermined questions. These questions are formulated based on student discussion over the last few months while in my role, and were noted as important areas of discussion for our post-secondary students. I'll begin with the topic of policing. Stephen McNeil recently announced a formative review of the justice system in our province, but we know that the systemic issue of discrimination in the policing industry is a long-standing one. So what do you see as the next logical step for Halifax to deal with the discriminatory practices in the policing industry, starting once again with Craig?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that question. As you indicated, I'm happy to see that the provincial government has stepped in to apologize for the systemic racism that has marked the system of justice, including the policing and the court systems. As outlined in Premier McNeil's address on the 29th, we now need to make government accountable for following through on this restorative process. I'm excited to see what the outcome will be and how it's implemented, especially since the new approach to public safety and the diverse panel which will be working on this platform.
Thank you. And over to Wei.
Thank you for that, Samantha. So the first part is, I think we have to acknowledge the hurt and injustice that racism has caused so many in Halifax. And I said this in my platform that, you know, it's the broad community, racism in the broad community, but also the action and inaction of the municipal government itself and of the police services that serve Halifax. So, and that is both historic racism in present day. I continue to educate and learn myself while amplifying the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in District 7 and HRM. So about a month ago, Council voted to adopt a motion of mine, and I'm going to read it, for a staff report to outline a process and timeline for a broad review of policing and public safety, which shall examine the potential for shifting or creating programs for civilian delivery of non-core police functions. This review shall include, but not be limited to, traffic enforcement, public safety, community standards, mental health, and municipal enforcement functions, and will include a plan for engaging with the public, stakeholders, subject matter experts, and subject to their agreement, the Board of Police Commissioners. So the idea of this motion is that services, to find out what services should and should not be delivered by the police. And the intention is to support Black and Indigenous and racialized communities by looking to rebalance service delivery and talk about how we can change policing, the core function of policing that would be left to address the concerns that were outlined in the Wortley report and all the other research that unequivocally shows that we have systemic racism in the police force. And so the goal is to enhance community resilience through enhancement and development of alternative complementary civilian services, as well as changing how we deliver policing. So that could be civilian mental health. It could be removal of non-core programs. That could be in addition to conventional sworn police officers, it could be new types of officers who respond, who are civilians and are not sworn officers. There's lots of options that need to be explored, but I can't tell you what I think should happen, because the key piece is to take all the research and get people from the communities that have been most disadvantaged by this historic racism and develop a plan based on what we hear. But it shouldn't be a review of whether we need to do something. We've done that with the Wortley report and everything. It has to be a program, a engagement about what are we going to do, and then we have to execute that. We have to make that happen.
Thank you. And over to Jen.
That step needs to be determined through real consultation with the communities most impacted by the systemic racism in our policing system. I am talking about the Black and Indigenous communities. As a white disabled woman that has never had reason to be worried about an encounter with the police, I should not be trying to make all those decisions. I wonder, though, if we should be talking about civilian police accountability councils in Halifax. That's where the police are under the control of the community. Right now, we can't even get answers from the HRP or the RCMP when we want to know things. It's not even clear who they work for, and these people have weapons. My feeling is that the people should have control over the police, so the police can do what the people want them to.
Thank you. And my second question, which a few of you have alluded to, was about whether you see the need to reallocate funding to other sectors to more equipped to deal with certain aspects like mental health that was mentioned. So I'm wondering if any of the candidates would like to speak to that as well. Starting with Craig.
Sure. So with that question, I feel as though that most definite defunding, sorry, there's noise outside. Defunding the police is not the answer. We need to educate police on how to handle certain situations in certain communities so that it does not automatically become a topic of misuse of their authority or shooting or kneeling and or standing on people's throats and with the inability to be able to breathe. Policing services and persons need to be held accountable for their actions, just like we are as civilians. No one should be above the law.
Thank you. Wei, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. I mean, I think I spoke to it pretty much in my intro, but I'll just say that, the cartoon that was going around showing all the burdens police carry being carried by other people so they can focus on their core mandate has really struck a chord with me. I do think that the police budget could be reduced in order to help fund some of these other programs. There's definitely opportunities to do that, but I think what's important is having a plan to do so and cutting the budget when you don't have mental health supports in place or unsworn officers or more compliance officers in place or any of the other things that we're going to talk about over the next while because of my motion. I don't think that would be wise, but I do think that if you're talking about fundamentally changing the way you do policing and public safety, that the budget would be something that you're going to be talking about. And we already have, there's already discussion about what that might look like. And I think it could result in less money going to the police force.
Thank you. And Jen, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, I think experts in education and crisis management need to be consulted. I may support the incremental defunding of the police, both HR and police and the RCMP, depending on what the communities most affected want.
Thank you for those answers. I'm going to switch gears now over to transportation, which has been a hot topic in Halifax for the last few years. So firstly, more broadly, what are your ideas to make transportation more eco-friendly? With the follow-up of, do you support the implementation of more bike lanes? I'm going to start with Wei this time.
Okay, so on transit and moving people around, I've promised that Halifax will invest in the proposed rapid transit network and changes in how we move people from place to place. We had the culmination of years of work was the rapid transit plan that came to council 3 or 4 months ago that talks about creating a bus rapid transit network, new ferries to Bedford and a couple other places, Rockingham and or just past Rockingham and the Shannon Park when ready, and electrifying the bus fleet, which is something that I think is really important in terms of our carbon goals. We've come face to face with the real barriers in mobility in the municipality the last while, and we need to make sure that we are making the investments in the bus lanes and the bike lanes the infrastructure to be able to move people around differently and in a more environmental way. Just today, there's a news story in the CBC about how we've built 7 kilometers of bus lanes that have just started to open up in Halifax in the last couple of days. And that's just the start. The goal is that 60% of the, when it opens, that 60% of the bus rapid transit routes would be on dedicated lanes. So I absolutely support that investment. I've tried with my promises this election to promise things that were like, I'm being pragmatic. I'm trying to make sure that I'm only promising things that are in HRM's control. This plan that we have, $550 million rapid transit plan, would require federal and provincial funding, but the feds have already announced the funding through a program called ICIP, and we believe that the province will be on board with actually contributing their component and unlocking that funding. And then as far as the talking about biking, I think that, we have the funding now to complete the construction of the regional center all ages and abilities bike network. And so you'll see major work happen on that in the next 3 years, and it'll be done. But now what we need to do is connect Woodlawn and Bedford and mainland Halifax better to the regional center so that people in the near suburbs can get in. And I mean, what's really exciting, and it's not always evident to people who don't spend their day immersed in the city, is we have this bike framework and we have a bunch of distinct projects. Lower Water Street bike lane going in next year, Cogswell hopefully happening starting next year, continuing Barrington Street to Africville and Africville to Windsor Street Exchange, the Windsor Street Exchange project that just got funded for $90 million, the Bedford Highway project, and then the project in Bedford to connect Bedford and Sackville. It's actually almost certain in 3 years you'll be able to bike from the Seaport Market to First Lake and Sackville on protected bike lanes, which is a phenomenal change for Halifax. And so we have to keep pushing those projects forward and getting the partnerships that we need to be able to deliver that, and it will change the way, it'll transform the way people move in the city.
Thank you. I know Jen wants to ask a question before I move over to Craig there.
Sorry. So Jen, we were kind of going backwards a little bit. Didn't have a chance to get the question, but Jen would like to know, what is a core policing service? And that is to Waymason. What is a core policing service?
Well, classically, it would be investigating crime rather than doing kind of compliance things. So like investigating a murder.
Thank you. What did you want me to ask you? I asked Craig. Oh, and asked Craig. Okay. And then there was another question for Craig about bike lanes. And can you word it again, Jen? How will disabled parking be affected by bike lanes?
It's a great question. A part of my answer that I will give in a moment is actually talking about the bike barriers and the concrete slabs that are sectioning up the road to the barriers. I think that they should be removed. They're very expensive to maintain. And I am actually in the south end of Halifax, just opposite of South Park Street. And the barriers that are on South Park Street are already falling apart. They're crumbling on the road just because of the construction that's happening next door on the corner of Spring Garden and South Park Street. So I feel as though that we need to remove those. And I mean, the streets itself some of them are very narrow. So to have bike lanes and bike barriers in the way, I feel as though that it's a disaster. Like, I mean, I say for the accessibility of wheelchair accessible and people who need that service, like they are in the way, like they're not being able to be utilized.
That doesn't really answer how a vehicle with a disabled parking tag will get to get to their destination.
Yeah.
Well, I say, I mean, we know that parking is changing in the HRM. So, I mean, with the initial coin slots, parking meters being taken away, I mean, there is that option that you have more room because the parking meters are no longer there. But again, I mean, they say parking is parking, unfortunately. If you need to go anywhere at all, I mean, you need to abide by the parking meter rules and or the designated signs that are ahead of you. So, I mean, I don't necessarily know what the outcome is that you're looking for, but I mean, they're saying we need to do it as safely as possible. Ideally, the accessible wheelchair buses and vehicles have the accessible doors on the passenger side. So, I mean, as long as you are pulled up at a safely designated spot, I don't see that the barriers being gone, that there would be any more of an aggravation and or a barrier to you being able to use them.
Will you be in the bike lane?
Well, and again, that depends because not all bus lanes and so the majority of the places that are downtown that I've seen are road, off to the shoulder of the road is the parking, next to the barrier is the bus lane, or not the bus lane, sorry, the bike lanes. So in that aspect, I mean, I would say that in an ideal world, it would be nice if the bike lanes and the pedestrian lanes weren't in the way, by where are you getting the extra space? We need to consider the allotted space that we have for roads. I mean, I'm sure you know that there's a lot of roads such as Hollis Street that you can't use a bike lane and an accessible, a bus lane and a bike lane at the same time, because as the buses turn, they impede in that space. So, I mean, I think ideally, I mean, it would be, in an ideal world, it'd be nice to have big enough spaces that we're able to operate traffic, accessible accessible buses and bikes at the same time. But I think ideally it'll depend on what area you're in, what street you're on.
Yeah.
We are at our time there for discussion, so I'm going to restate the question and allow Craig to answer, and then I'll move over to Wei if you'd like to give any answers to that same question from Jen.
Sure. So, what makes transit more eco-friendly? I would immediately say, considering that we need to implement electronic buses. This will cut down on emissions and carbon. With introducing these buses, we also need to consider new routes where constituents do not need to wait an extended amount of time for buses and more accessible routes without the need to transfer to 2 or 3 or more buses to get to their destinations. Allowing the buses a less eco-friendly footprint as well, by allowing the buses to be transported or transferred into electric buses. Because as of right now, as you see, going up and down the streets, when the buses are stopped, all you see is a big puff of black carbon emission. So electronic buses hopefully will alleviate that. And in my support for implementation of bike lanes is yes. Bike lanes, yes. Bike barriers, no. Bike barriers are very expensive to install and maintain. And especially with this winter coming, they're going to be crushed and broken by the plows if they're still there. They are falling apart as it is. And I mean, we have our traffic and our weather systems to be concerned about, not bus lanes, or not bike barriers. That was a tongue twister.
Great, thank you. I'll move over to Wei, and if you'd like to respond to Jen's questions.
Well, actually, I was more going to respond to what Craig said, but I will respond to Jen's question as well. So there is something called the TAC, the Traffic Association of Canada. That's a bunch of engineers that set standards for these things. And there is also something called NACTO, the North American Urban Traffic Association. Can't remember exactly what it stands for. And so when we're building these bike lanes, we're building, or a bus lane, we're building them to internationally accepted engineering standards, and those standards can allow them to be accommodated in small roads like we see in Halifax. So I'm confident there will be commissioning problems, but if you can have bike lanes in winter cities like Edmonton and Montreal and see the number of people biking going up because they have protected bike lanes, I'm pretty confident we can do that here too. As to Jen's question, that is a great question, and she's right on. It's something that we're concerned about all the time. Where possible, the bike lanes are situated to try and preserve accessible parking. So for example, in the South Park bike lane, they could only put parking on one side of South Park down by Uncommon Grounds. And so they kept the parking on the side that had accessible parking, which was identified for needs for people in the buildings there. And in the South Park up by the Paramount and the new curve, they kept the pull-in front of Bon Mi, and they've turned that into accessible parking. It's not always possible to have all these uses in one place. So they try and talk to the people who are using, they actually try and talk to the users who are using the accessible parking, find out where they're going, and try and find places nearby. So the example would be University Avenue. The accessible parking in front of the McCain building on University was moved up around onto Seymour and Lamarchant, and additional parking added on the other side downhill a little bit by the Student Union building. It's not always perfect. I'm not saying it is, and I'm not saying everybody was happy about it, but I think staff worked very hard to try and accommodate all users, and we're always open to trying to modify the programs that are coming forward to accommodate the accessible parking.
Right. But with that being said, Wei, I mean, they say you're looking at 4 or 5 different accommodated spots. People who need those services, they don't want to travel to the end of South Park or the other end of South Park to be able to access those. Like, I mean,
so those are where the parking spots were before. So there's no functional change on South Park. So that's not really a good argument, to be blunt, right? Now the other issue, of course, is that whether you're accessing accessible parking or not, bus lanes and bike lanes take people out of cars and speed up all the traffic, including the buses and the taxis and the cars, right? So these are investments we're making to try and reduce reliance on cars and also to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint. I think that's important.
Well, I think Jennifer would disagree.
I'm going to move to Jen now and allow her to answer the question, as well as answer anything or make comments on anything either Craig or Wei said.
Jen says thank you. Do you want to read out the transportation? Okay.
I am campaigning on the fact that transit should be free to all users. I was very upset with Council's decision to let Uber into the Halifax market. Though it is marketed as ride-sharing, in other cities it has meant a 60% increase in traffic, which means people aren't sharing rides. They are adding to congestion and emissions. It also means the loss of taxi jobs and industry which new immigrants depend on. Canada does not recognize the experiences of many of the people who eventually become cab drivers. Uber does offer choice, but it comes on the backs of our most vulnerable. There is a problem with the number of accessible taxis in HRM. A few years ago, there were 48. Now there are only 14. There was talk that opening up the market through Uber would allow more accessible vehicles, but the province did not allow a 25% premium to be charged on all Uber trips, which was to go into a fund that would help offset the cost of accessible vehicles. HRM was not given the power to make that charge by the province. Even if it was allowed, it would have required about 400,000 trips to buy one energy-efficient accessible van. People who have accessible vehicles can provide trips to other people, but the low fare that Uber riders expect is a detriment to that. I, myself, do have an accessible vehicle, and it does spend most of the time in the parking lot, but it costs $15 to hire an assistant, and what I really want is to pay them $21.80. But Uber riders aren't generally willing to pay that amount. And because Uber expects me to pay for maintenance and repair, I don't feel it would be a good use of the limited time I have an assistant for to pimp them out as cab drivers. I would not be making any revenue.
And that was Uber, not Uber. Sorry, it's the software.
No worries there. Did you want to respond to anything either Craig or Wei said from your question?
No.
Perfect. Thank you for that discussion. Our next section is about employment, finances, and economic development in COVID-19, as well as beyond COVID-19. Firstly, we know that a livable wage was just passed council for contract workers. However, there are still many workers who will not be earning a livable wage. Do you agree that minimum wage needs to rise? And how would you plan on addressing that issue, starting with Craig?
Sure. So making and earning a livable wage will need to be seriously looked into. The reason I say this is because everything in price is increasing. With these increased costs, people are having issues with bill payments and ruining their own credits. However, with this being said, if minimum wage were to increase to what the affordable wage is, I think that everything will increase. The tricky situation to this is that minimum wage currently is $12.55 here in Nova Scotia, or $12.55 in Nova Scotia, which is considered to be poverty. And a livable wage in Halifax is considered to be $21.80 an hour. We definitely need to improvement from. We definitely need involvement from all levels of government to assist with those who are on minimum wage to help them break the poverty barriers. Not having the money available to do what is needed or to pay bills puts a lot of stress on individuals. Mental health is contributed by an overburden of stress. So, I mean, we need to eliminate and look at this option as to how we are able to move forward with a common ground.
Thank you. And moving over to Wei now.
Well, so minimum wage is set by the province. So what the municipality can do is, and I support it going up, I absolutely do. Minimum wage has been stuck for the last 5 years of this Liberal government and has not gone up sufficiently for costs. It's awkward talking about living wage when I see Christine Saulniers and the attendees, and I feel like none of us on this call are adequately prepped to talk about that with her in the audience. She should be the one talking about it, but we did approve the supplier code of conduct and the living wage requirements at council last week, and that was a near run thing. I didn't think that would pass, to be honest, but thanks to the good work of Councillor Smith to bring forward a social policy framework, it got to a point where it had enough momentum that we had the majority of votes for that. That's just the first phase. Councillor Smith talked in that meeting about bringing policy changes to make sure that HRM employees are paid a living wage. And as far as minimum wage goes, I don't know beyond summer students maybe get minimum wage. I don't know. What most of our employees are union, and so what we heard from the HR people in the meeting is that they're already getting a high enough wage or a living wage, not a high enough wage, but a living wage. So the question is, who else is there between our contract workers and our union workers? Are there anyone else who we can impact and bring those wages up, and then start working our way through things like arm's length organizations like Whole Harbour Place or the Forum and that kind of thing that aren't directly run by HRM but are funded in part by HRM, and start giving them the additional funding over time to at least come up to a higher, what minimum wage should be, 15 or 16 bucks at least, and then moving toward a living wage. So I think there's levers we have to try and force that as much as we can, but again, to bring up the minimum wage itself, I think is, the province will have to act on that.
Thank you, and I'll go over to Jen.
I think the living wage put out by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, CCPA, should guide the province in setting a new minimum wage. It may not be viewed as favorable by the Chamber of Commerce, but it is what residents of Halifax need in order to survive. The current living wage for Halifax is $21.80. On Tuesday, HRM Council voted to make a living wage a requirement in most contracts. This is a huge step forward. The minimum wage as set by the province is $12.55, which is more than $9 below the living wage. The municipality has no say in the amount. However, I am committed to paying the living wage to all municipal employees and in all municipal contracts. So, we have the living wage in most contracts. Now we need to work on getting the employees of HRM the living wage.
Thank you. Next question is on the topic of employment. How do you plan to support students who have lost their jobs due to COVID-19 and are struggling to make ends meet, not to mention paying tuition? Starting this time with Craig.
Sure. So as many post-secondary students adapt to the new reality brought on by COVID, I'm sure that they are concerned about the effect of the pandemic and their abilities to contribute to their studies, secure and retain employment, and pay their bills, and and save for tuition for the fall. I understand that there are a number of initiatives that are put together from the federal government, because I don't believe that this would be something that the municipal government would have jurisdiction over. But some of the programs with the federal government are the launch of the I Want to Help platform, a youth employment and skills strategy, which helps youth develop and maintain skills. There are student work placement programs, additional distinctional-based support to help First Nations, Inuit, and Métis National post-secondary students, a support to student researchers doing postdoctoral fellowships, enhancing student assistance for fall 2020. The Canada Student Loan has just changed its eligibility requirements for the 2021 studies to allow more students to qualify for supports and will be eligible for greater amounts. And then of course there's the CERB, the Canadian Emergency, the Canadian Emergency Student Benefit. And then there's a Canada Student Service Grant. So I'm hopeful that the post-secondary students will have and will be able to take advantage of these programs as they continue into their new studies.
Thank you. Over to Wei now. Oh, I think you're on mute there, Wei.
That you told me that too. The easy and crappy answer would be to say it's a provincial and federal issue, right? I could just, but the fact is that the municipality benefits greatly from the students that are here. It's challenging, to say the least, to be the council representing 6 degree granting institutions and 30,000 students joining us every day, Monday to Friday during the school year. But I've lived here since I was an undergrad myself, and I love the energy and excitement of all the students when they come back in September, despite, the phone calls I get sometimes about parties. So what we can do as a municipality is to continue to support students the best we can through summer jobs and part-time jobs and the Bridging the Gap internship program that we have, and try and protect what we already do, and maybe even with the federal partnerships that Craig was talking about, expand what we already do, despite the fact that we're going to have tremendous financial pressure next year when we see the impact on property tax of COVID start to come through the assessment roll, and that will be significant. And we can continue to provide programming and support through rec centers in the public library to students. I think we need to do more though than that. I think that municipal leaders, and I'm one of them, we need to keep pushing the federal and provincial governments for more supports for students, and especially for the institutions. I'm worried about students, but I'm also worried about the financial impact on these universities themselves and their stability at this time. And I think that we need to be really clear that these universities and the students in them are critical to our social and economic health. And that's something I'm going to continue to do as councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. And over to Jen.
I wish the municipality had more control of provincial finances. Having more options for non-market housing is a start. I think HRM should open an office of non-market housing which could develop and distribute plans for a number of accessible, energy-efficient, and easy-to-construct backyard suites that people could build on their properties, and work with CMHC on a financing package. Students could be hired as part of the initial design process. As well, there would hopefully be a lot of construction and carpentry work on these suites, and at least some of that could go to students working under a professional carpenter or contractor. I also know St. Mary's has a bus pass for all students, but my free transit idea will benefit those not in school or who have graduated.
Thank you. As we know, COVID-19 has significantly impacted the budgets for all levels of government, and we know that the HRM did recast their budget in June, but I wonder what other initiatives you plan on bringing forward in order to support the recovery of the Halifax economy, starting with Clay.
So the recast cut about $65–70 million and tightened the budget considerably. I guess the answer to the question really is we don't know yet, because it took until just 2 weeks ago for the federal and provincial governments to agree on the safe reopening funding to flow to Nova Scotia municipalities to cover the losses from March, April, May that were already in our past. So we are hopeful that the federal and provincial governments will make clear the kind of programs that are going to be available and the kind of funding that will be available. And then in January, we find out what the impact is on the assessment roll, and that will show how big the budget gap is going to be. And while we're running transit as we are right now, it's at 50% capacity. So it means that revenues are down on transit as well. And so what we're hoping in terms of bringing, in order to bring recovery for the Halifax economy, municipalities in Nova Scotia can't do grants to businesses, but what we can do is we've tried to waive some fees, like with patios, and we've tried to enable more patios and outdoor spaces for the restaurants. And we all know the hospitality sector and anything tourism related is really badly hit. And basically we're just trying to be as creative as possible while keeping our expenses under control so that commercial taxes don't go up, despite the fact that our revenue has gone down, and continue to advocate very strongly for supports for business, especially that hospitality sector, as we go forward into the next fiscal year.
Thank you, and I'll pass it over to Craig.
Sure. So reviewing and looking through the budget, as Wei indicated, that the allocation was for less spending, but within what was allocated for, I don't see anything for schools or universities, daycare, or child recreation. So I think that ideally that should be something that we should look at and incorporating within the budget if available. But again, we need to look at ways of spending wisely and not spending vigorously. We need to look at ways we can help preserve the economy.
Thank you. And over to Jen.
I will suggest that all employers pay a living wage. This would mean that employees have more money in their wallets. This in turn means that people have money to spend in the local businesses.
Thank you. The last question I have on the topic of economic recovery is all about international students. Many of our international students have been left in the dark during COVID-19, with many not able to return home due to border closes, most not being eligible for federal aid packages, and they pay significantly more for tuition. How do you plan to support international students that they want to stay in Halifax after they've completed their studies? And I'll start with Craig on this question.
Sure. So again, I say, as much as I believe that the municipal government has been able to do, I think this more so would kind of look at federal government, because as my understanding is, the international students who have a valid permit, a valid study permit, who were approved for a study permit before March, are exempt from traveling restrictions. So, I mean, they were able to go back and forth. Students already in Canada were assured that they wouldn't lose their eligibility for postgraduate work permits if they completed more than 50% of the program online. International students are permitted to work more than 20 hours a week off campus during this academic session during COVID without losing their essential services in essential services without losing their the permit status. I'm hopeful that when international students conclude their studies, that they stay in Halifax and perhaps with their families, with their families and participate in the growth of our economy. Starting a business and employing diverse candidates is what keeps money in our community, helps our economy strive. We need to look at ways to help international students by giving them perhaps startup monies or other incentives such as tax breaks and other initiatives to make it worthwhile for them to stay after they graduate university.
Thank you. And over to Wei.
So I think, the big thing here is we need to turn up our empathy and we need to look for compassionate solutions. All the things that are happening federally and provincially are true. But when I saw this question, I really thought about it and I thought, how would I want people to treat my kids who are university aged if they were in this situation where they couldn't get home and they were trapped in some other country and all of the issues around that. And so I think Halifax needs to really rise to this occasion as a municipality and as a loving community. We have to work with the student associations, so I'll be talking to you soon, and with the universities to connect international students with programs and organizations and families to provide support. What came to mind was I was thinking about what I think was one of the best things that ever happened in Halifax, our enthusiastic response to the Syrian refugee lift 5 years ago. Let's get in contact with all those not-for-profits and faith communities and talk about how can we provide that support and be that family for these students and show them that we care about them and understand the stresses that they're under and be even more welcoming than we would normally be. And I think, this is important, not just from a human and moral and ethical point of view, but the international students are a critical part of our economic growth, right? The changes in the visas that allow students to stay if they have a job have been a big part of the population growth. 65% of the population growth the last couple of years in Halifax has been internationals. So, and a lot of them are students. So I think we owe it to them in this crisis. I don't have all the answers at all, and no one who lives in Halifax, whether they're a resident, a citizen, or an international student, should face this crisis alone. And I think we really have to act to embrace them. Thanks.
Thank you. And over to Jen.
Ask at the end? At the beginning? Okay, 1 second. I'm just going to add something at the beginning.
No worries.
Okay, hopefully this is right.
International students don't qualify for any of the national programs. They don't even qualify for student loans. I used to live with a roommate/live-in caregiver who is intimately familiar with the St. Mary's Board of Governors. The board voted for a tuition increase for foreign students, which seems absurd. I don't think HRM has a big enough budget to solve the problems of international students, but HRM can help make the city more equitable. I commit to having an advisory committee who can help me gain a variety of perspectives. I will propose that each member of council have a similar committee. Staff can then attend the committee meetings to help them gain insight into issues affecting the community. In my platform, I commit to spending 1% of the overall HRM budget on funding for art and culture. I call for more green space and the protection of the Halifax Commons. If we want a great city, let's commit to it. As I said before, I am committed to the issue of making affordable housing a reality. We have a new convention center. Why don't we buy it with the help of the federal government and convert the office tower and hotel into affordable units? There are not going to be any in-person conventions for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. So the final question coming through our predetermined questions is a topic which has been by far the biggest concern for all of our post-secondary students in Halifax. The average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Halifax is approximately $1,200, and our vacancy rate is at an all-time low. What are your plans to address the housing crisis in Halifax, as it remains a key barrier to young people staying and choosing to live in Halifax? And I'll start with Craig.
Sure. So, as Samantha, that's a great question. And as if you follow the election and the candidates, the majority of them have affordable housing as one of their platform ideas. I believe that we need to address the lack of inventory that's available, reduce the amount of red tape for investors who want to spend their private dollars, and also to help build quicker and faster without delays. I also think that conversing with the developers in the preliminary stages to offer tax incentives for a percentage of the building for affordable housing will go a long way in helping the shortage of affordable housing. If elected this month into council, I will ensure that I work with these developers to lay out many options as they can see how we can combat this issue. Quickly and effective is what we need during this time.
Thank you. And I'll go over to Clay.
So yeah, we're in a unique place in the history of Halifax. We had almost 32,000 people move here in the last 4 years, and it's outstripped the supply of new housing. So all types of housing, from low income or social housing to workforce housing, are required now. One report was that for greenfield suburban housing, that we thought we had adequate land to go till 2032 based on how fast we were growing before, and it's all pretty much sold out right now. So an affordable housing approach has to be pragmatic. It has to really focus on the resources the municipality controls and not wait for the province. We need to do the things, we saw council in the last 2 meetings, regulate Airbnbs, do tax breaks for not-for-profits that are going, and permit deals for not-for-profits that are going to build affordable housing, approve the density bonusing funding framework for affordable, to invest in affordable housing, and do multi-year tax deals. So all those things are in play right now to help make affordable housing more possible, and the money will actually, from density bonusing, will actually result in more affordable housing being funded directly, and that gives us the potential to participate in some federal programs that haven't come to Nova Scotia yet because the province hasn't been doing it. The province has the primary responsibility for housing in Nova Scotia, has since 1996, but as I think I said earlier, 2 years ago, I convinced council to ask the province to give us housing back. We're the only city other than Winnipeg that doesn't control housing, and I think that the crisis you're seeing right now is exacerbated by that. I think that that's a big part of why we have this issue. It's not a provincial issue. It's not an issue for cabinet, but it's an issue for council, and we need that control of housing back. Short of getting full control of housing back, we need legislative change so that we can get inclusive zoning and enforcement provisions for the density bonusing, so that we don't just take money. Right now, we don't have the mechanism to force developers to put affordable units in new construction. And that's a real shame. I mean, both the previous NDP government and the Liberal government have not been able to give us the tools we need, even though we have the density bonusing added to the charter. So I'm hopeful that these things will happen in the next while, but I'm really focused on what the municipality can do rather than talking about what the province should do. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know there's a question from Jen of our panelists. I'm going to let her answer this question first, and then I will ask the question to Craig and Wei.
Okay, sorry, technical difficulties.
No worries.
All right, this is Jen's answer.
I plan to make landlord licensing a reality as proposed by Acorn. As I mentioned before, I think HRM should open an office of non-market housing because the province has not given HRM the charter right for inclusive zoning. HRM made it legal for backyard suites to be permitted in all parts of the municipality. I think HRM should help landowners make these suites a reality. I think in order to get help from HRM, A landowner would have to commit to renting the suite for individuals or families in the long term. It could not be used for short-term rentals.
Thank you. And the question from Jen is, how will the climate react to the added concrete in terms of building more housing? And I'll go to Craig first.
Sure. So essentially, the damaging issue with urban sprawl is that the concrete tends to release a lot of carbon emissions. I personally think the HRM should look into porous concrete. The reality of urban environment is that concrete covers close to the entire area of the city. And when it rains, the water cannot penetrate the asphalt to be absorbed by the earth and enter the groundwater system. This type of concrete system also results in less needs for the irrigation system because of the plants and trees have direct access to infiltrated water systems. The innovation of this new technology could find a way to be used for renewable energy and human movement. So I say with all these new developments going up, I think that if we change what looks like the way that they use the concrete with porous concrete, I believe that that'll help our ecosystem and ideally the Halifax 2050 plan that's been recently implemented and approved by council.
Thank you. And over to Wei to respond.
Well, I mean, there's two different pieces to that. One is that how buildings are built is governed by the National Building Code, which the province actually sets. It's advisory nationally, comes down to the province, and the municipality doesn't have the ability to require things that I wish we could. And I've been meeting with the Department of Energy for a year about this, encouraging them to go faster on changing the National Building Code in Nova Scotia to be greener. And that's something that we need to see get done given our current building boom. I think that when you look at construction and where people are going to live, I love the idea that Jen has for doing as many conversions and incentivizing that, but I don't think that's going to get us to the number of units that we need for the population growth that we have. And so I think we have to balance, I would love to see carbon cure type stuff for concrete being required. I would like to also consider when we're talking about greenhouse gases that we have to look at the cost of people sprawling development. If you don't have enough units here, then you end up with like Clayton recently announcing they're building 1,000 units in Enfield beyond our control to stop. And those people are going to drive to work. So we need to have units in the city where people can take buses and where people can bike. And so I think that you have to weigh all those things. And I do feel that there are ways to assess the carbon impact of concrete against all of the other carbon impacts and come up with solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, would you like to respond to either of those?
No, thank you. But the other answers were great. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the predetermined questions. Thank you everyone for your thoughtful answers. I know I saw a question in the chat, so I'm just going to pull that up and I will ask it to each candidate. So the question states, what role, if any, do candidates think the city should have in supporting overdose prevention and supervised consumption sites? And I'll start with Wei.
Okay, so great question, Evan. I guess the support would be that we need to stand firm on the fact that right now medical doctors' offices and services are allowed in all zones in Halifax. So as much as the people, some of the residents around the current overdose prevention site were upset that it's been located there, it's allowed by land use bylaw, and I support that. I think that the height of the least desirable thing for any counselor, that's not the right word, but the least palatable thing is the word I was looking for, is when people are against a daycare or a hospice or group home, small options home, or something like this, the overdose prevention site. And so we have to stand firm on making sure that those are allowed. In terms of supporting them, we're already, all three of us are talking about how the municipality has to do more on affordable housing. I can't see us getting into healthcare. We have no direct responsibility for that. Again, in Ontario and parts west, public health is run by the municipalities on behalf of the province, but public health is all entirely in Nova Scotia. It's in the Health Authority, Nova Scotia Health Authority. And so we have no expertise, no staff, no role in that, but I do support overdose prevention sites existing, and I'm glad there is one in my district. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll go over to Craig next.
Sure. So I kind of echo what Wei said in relation to the housing and health system, the health system. I worked with the Department of Health and Wellness within the provincial government for many years. So, I mean, I believe that this question would be more so related to them than opposed to municipalities, just because, again, the jurisdiction, or the municipality doesn't have that jurisdiction to look at supporting or not supporting overdose preventions and different consumption sites.
Thank you. And I'll go over to Jen.
All right, so I'm going to translate as we go, so it may take a little bit of time, but I ask everyone to be a little patient. I got the first bit. I know healthcare is provincial, but if we have the ability to put in overdose prevention sites, we should encourage and support them. Good? Yes.
Thank you. So as of right now, I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I will ask each candidate, if you're able to put your email in the chat there for attendees if they'd like to send you a question after the debate or anything like that. So thank you all, the attendees, for their questions, for being here tonight. Voting is a right and a privilege that for a long time, some of us in the room would not have had, and some still do not, which is why it's so important to be informed before heading to the polls. Before I allow the candidates to give their closing remarks, I want to thank the candidates for being here, for putting up with all of my emails over the last few weeks. And I also want to thank again all the attendees for being here and for being engaged voters. So I'm now going to allow each candidate to give their closing remarks, again for 3 minutes, and I will start this time with Wei.
I don't have 3 minutes to close. I'll just say thank you so much, Samantha. It wasn't that many emails, just a lot. I think on what's great about Halifax is that on all the important issues, all three of us, especially I was really struck by that overdose prevention thing. We all agree that's important. And on the core of most issues, I think that we agree. The biggest concern for this election for me is, aside from getting the message across and all that, is just getting people to vote. I mean, it's so weird being in these COVID times, and I still am talking to people in the streets when we're putting up election signs who don't know the election's coming and that voting starts on Tuesday. So I'm not picking anybody in the mayor race, but I think Max is right on when he's out there basically just telling people you should vote, especially young people, and students should vote, because ultimately the future of the city, the choices we make now will impact you the longest, because you'll be here the longest dealing with them. So something I've said every election I've run in is we really need the youth to vote, or we're not, or the city will not reflect your values and what's important to you. So I encourage everyone to vote. If you have any questions, I put my email in the chat. All my information is on votewaymason.ca is my election website, and it's been an honor to be here with my opponents and hopefully friends who are running for District 7, and look forward to seeing how it all turns out in just, is it 16 days, Craig? I think it's 16 days.
Yeah, just a couple of days, that's right. So yeah, so again, with myself, I want to thank you for hosting this informative webinar, and for the people who are in attendance, both my candidates and also the attendees. Again, just kind of echoing way, it's very important to have your voice heard. You are a voice for the generations. We need to have more people out and about who are expressing their opinions, and the only way you can do that during this time frame is to vote. There are several elections going on, both within our district and also with the mayor. So again, I mean, try to urge as many people to get out and vote. I say you can vote on your computer and or your smartphone starting the 6th up to including the 14th. So you could do it from the comfort of your home in your PJs while you're eating pizza perhaps. But I say it's very important to get out and vote, to let your voices be heard. So I encourage that. Thank you guys.
Thank you. I know another question came in while we were doing these remarks, so I'll let Jen answer and then I'll make it a brief question if anyone would like to answer. So on to Jen now.
Thank you for hosting. Please vote. Halifax is a great city, but it needs to come to grips with certain realities that we have spent decades, hundreds of years, in some cases, trying to ignore. These include environmental, economic, and social realities that in many ways we are still denying, because we have invested so much in them that we can't bring ourselves to let go, even though they're sinking and taking us all down with them. I recognize that the way we deal with housing, land use, the environment, social equity, and community consultation all need to change. We no longer have the option just to build more. We need to figure out how to make what we have already built work differently. This may be like getting hand-me-downs from an older brother with bad taste. And I'm sorry about that, but this is the world that has been left to us.
Thank you. So the question here that I'll pose, it says, it appears that HRM's new parking laws will eliminate the current free 2-hour street parking around SMU and Dal with permits required. Is this correct?
No. So what's happening is, if you look at the map, it shows zones, but generally there are some places like around the Common and Lower Water Street that they're going to add the pay stations, but generally if it was already a meter, it's going to have the new pay station, and if it was already time controlled, it's not changing. So I've gotten that email and I've gotten a lot of tweets about that, but the intention is not to change that. There are a couple of places near commercial areas or where institutions have asked for parking meters for years, but nobody wanted to buy new parking meters and install them when we were just a short time away from getting these pay stations for the last 10 years. And now there are going to be some tiny changes, but nothing major like that at all. Any other comments on that from Craig or Jen?
No, I say that was also my understanding in relation to the pay stations, because they are replacing metered parking.
Perfect. And any comment from Jen?
Oh, nope.
Perfect. So thank you, everybody. That brings us to the end of the debate tonight. Just a reminder, the actual election day is October 17th. Telephone and online voting begins this Tuesday, October 6th through the 14th. Advanced polling days are the 10th and the 13th. Thank you to everyone for being here. And I will ask that the candidates stay behind a few minutes while we let the attendees leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.